Well, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out for the program today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited.
Me too. So let's begin our journey with this. Looking at the calendar right now, being in mid March, 6 years ago, this pandemic was beginning and it changed so much. How did you get through the coronavirus era, and how has it changed the way that you approach life and work today?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I think for a lot of highly sensitive people, for a lot of introverts, for the cognitively intense, as I sometimes describe the bunch of folks who don't fall into the neurotypical category, found a lot of freedom and autonomy and agency through the pandemic because flexible work all of a sudden became a thing overnight. Right, it profoundly reshapes everyone's daily life. Forcing some permanent changes in how people work and socialize and prioritize their health. And again, for those who find the traditional workplace rather overstimulating and psychologically unsafe, and where their cognitive capabilities just aren't able to reach them, access them to the fullest potential, then they were able to prioritize their health and shape their day in a way that worked for them and still get the same amount done or more. And that certainly was true for me.
So let me ask you this. If we had to synthesize, there's a lot of titles, there's a lot going on with the work that you do. If I put you in front of
Mhm.
13-year-olds at career day, and one of the kids wanted to know what you do for a living, how do you synthesize that for their brains for them to understand?
Sure. So I help people create environments that allow them to use all of their strengths. And that could mean something as simple as changing lighting or changing how much noise is in a space, whether that person's working alone or with other people. And it could mean some of the messages they're receiving from managers or teachers around how they're doing and asking questions, making sure they're prepared for whatever the assignment is, so that they can become their best selves at work.
So what did you want to be when you were that age? What was your dream job?
I wanted to be a teacher.
Okay. Okay. So take me back to your beginnings. Are you originally from San Francisco?
No, so I was born in Southern California, but my mom, sister, and I moved up to Eugene, Oregon, very small, quiet college town, when I was around four. My sister was around two. And my mom had fallen in love with this town in the wintertime. Without us ever having talked about it specifically, I think she also was intuitively designing her life around her innate sensitivities, and what her environmental needs were. And that was a slow and low environment, but that was safe, of course, to raise kids too. So that's where I grew up. And it was about at the end of 2013 that I recognized that I'd had a lot of firsts in Eugene. I had even gone to college there and had my first corporate work experience there. And then I was kind of hitting the ceiling. And that's what took me to San Francisco.
So take me back earlier on in your life, growing up. What were these seeds that were planted into you that eventually harvested into you getting people to a better place, to recognize that they need change? Obviously you recognize you need a change. How did all these seeds get planted and evolve into who you are today as a professional?
Sure. So I actually had the good fortune of being inside of a Montessori school when I was in like pre K and then kind of kindergarten age, that had a occupational therapist on site, and that occupational therapist had told my mom that some of my behaviors inside of that school might be the result of some sensory processing issues. And in the 80s at the time, the terminology that we had to describe such differences was sensory integration dysfunction. It's not a positive term or phrasing or pathology of a thing that's quite natural. But of course, for a small child dealing with sensory overload, the response is, all you have when you don't have a lot of language to describe what's going on is a bit of a freak out.
Yeah.
So I was then enrolled in occupational therapy to help with, some sensory integration. And it became, as I, again, grew older and had some language, we had some terminology for it, my mom and I did, where I would call it intense. That was the word we used to describe it. Like, are you feeling intense? I'm like, yes, feeling intense. And they're like,
Yeah.
okay. And we'd change something about my environment. And that was the word I could use with teachers, right? Everyone kind of gets, to a degree, like what intense means. And that something needs to change when you're feeling intense. So I started practicing very early, articulating my needs with really simple language. And that has carried through my education and getting a master's in organizational development and learning the simple language we could use to describe needs. Certainly moving away from accommodation language, my perspective and my preference, and inside of workplaces, just we all have needs, right? And we all have environmental conditions under which we do well or don't do so well. And we need to absolutely be able to articulate our needs to ourselves at minimum. To be like, oh, okay, this thing isn't working for me. I need to change something about this. But oftentimes we need someone else to help us meet those needs. And so we need simple language to be able to articulate that at work in a way that doesn't, get us, I think, especially in the United States, looked at as a risk, a legal risk, which is often the unintended consequence of accommodation language and accommodation requests that I have found in a career of human resources leadership.
So my son's on the spectrum. He's 21.
Mm,
So I've been in the sensory world. I've been in the special needs world for a long time. And I remember when he was born in '04, the rates of spectrum, as they call it, the autism spectrum, was probably like one in a couple hundred, maybe 500 to a couple hundred. And now we're at like one in, I don't know, probably one in five.
31.
Oh, and one in 31. Okay.
Yeah.
I know
In
I know it's
children.
low. From what you've seen, like dealing with sensory issues since the 80s and being in this field, why do you think the rates have exploded so much?
Yeah. It's certainly increased understanding of what any of this means, right? We only have so much research at a given time in history. Oftentimes it's uneven, especially in terms of men and women, right? Where we saw that the rate diagnoses in boys for ADHD or autism was much higher than in girls because girls have the are masking it better. The environmental messages that we're receiving covertly or overtly are to be really buttoned up. And so we learn to kind of mask and hide whatever it is that's going on really early. And so that can lead to much later diagnoses. But simply an understanding, and because ASD and ADHD and a number of other neuroconditions actually converge on this trait of sensory processing sensitivity, I would say that its evolution is really important. That in the early 80s, when I met with an occupational therapist, they called it sensory integration dysfunction. And then later it was updated to sensory processing disorder. I don't know how much of a evolution that is or progress that is. It's still being codified as a problem, right? As a disorder. And then later with the research by Dr. Elaine Aron and her team of researchers, that is actually a neutral trait. It's sensory processing sensitivity. And of course, when you don't understand it and you don't have self regulation techniques and you don't have environmental conditions and you don't have language for what's going on, and you're thrust into a world that was designed without your brain in mind, then of course it's going to uh, be perceived as and feel like a problem or a disorder or dysfunction. And that's certainly not to, ignore the fact that for many, right, executive function is still right a problem and can cause a lot of issues with retaining work or even getting work, etc. Um, but it just takes time to research these things and for people to actually poke at the status quo and say like maybe there's an alternative way of looking at this, right? Maybe there's a reason why it exists in a minority, but actually a large minority. And what I find really exciting about kind of the latest meta research on the trait of sensory processing sensitivity is that there's about three groups. Low sensitive, about 30%, moderately sensitive, around 40%, and then around 30% that are high sensitive. Of course, that's a spectrum, spectrums within a spectrum. So those on the very high end of sensory processing sensitivity do overlap quite a bit with like level one ASD. And I also find that HSP or sensory processing sensitivity also seems to show up with ADHD a lot. But that just means that we have relatively equal proportions in what is just an alternative survival strategy for the species. And that is a very new way of looking at this. But I'm hoping it's one that, as we continue to again build more awareness, not just awareness, but acceptance and curiosity and interest and exploration around it, and think of it in terms of our biology as a species, that we can then see that, oh, there's a reason that it exists and persists.
So, who's been your inspirational force that's allowed you to navigate, through your life as a person, as a professional, to get to this point in your life and to find where your true calling is?
Certainly. Yeah, Dr. Elaine Aron would be kind of the first kind of mentor uh, and inspiration. It wasn't until I moved to San Francisco that I really had to reckon with my sensory processing sensitivity. Having grown up after my earliest years, where of course it was difficult, again without language and understanding, and had to figure out how to manage needs. I was able to really do so pretty easily in the small town of Eugene, Oregon. And then I put myself in the deep end of the sensory pool by just going from that place to San Francisco. And I hit a sensory wall. It was difficult to speak. My thoughts, everything was so slow. And I called my dad to ask him, how have you been dealing with this? Because he stayed in Southern California. Like, how are you in this insane sensory environment and still functioning at a high level? And it's like, I have a meditation practice. I've been doing meditation for 25 years, and there's actually a place that you can go to in NorCal. I'll send you there. Go to the young person's retreat. And it was there in 2014, 15, where I met somebody and I was talking about why I was there and what I was going through, and that, it was called sensory processing disorder and it is a struggle. And he's like, no, 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 that what you have is not a disorder. It's a gift. You're a highly sensitive person and you need to read this book. And that was The Highly Sensitive Person by Dr. Elaine Aron.
Yeah.
And that changed everything for me. And there've been a number of inspiration since then, but that was the original and the through line, I think, in my life and career.
So, if you can meet anybody alive on the planet right now that's overcome some sensory issues or some things in their lives and they've risen above and they've made a big impact in the world, like a Temple Grandin kind of individual, who would you love to meet and talk to that might help you in your work and in your journey?
Oh man, yeah, great question. Oof, I mean, Greta, Greta Thunberg,
Yeah,
love to meet her.
yeah,
Oh, Sia, an artist, she's a singer-songwriter,
yeah.
love her music, would love to meet her.
Did you have you seen 6 Feet Under? Did you watch that series?
Yes, yeah,
And that end song that she did? Oh, yeah. All right. Anyway, I'm sorry. I got derailed
yes,
for a minute. That was so epic. That's probably one of the best endings of any show, but that
yeah,
soundtrack was very
mm-hmm,
necessary from her.
yes,
Um,
mm-hmm, yeah.
is she on the spectrum? Is she in that world?
Yeah, publicly diagnosed or self-identified. Yeah,
Okay, I did not realize that.
yeah,
Interesting. So how did she, is it autism spectrum or how Asperger's? What is it that she has?
yeah. Autism spectrum disorder is now like the only way that we describe anyone who's on the spectrum.
Okay,
Like previously, it may have been Asperger's, but the evolution in that
gotcha.
um, sensory condition is ASD broadly.
It's interesting because my son only has a long piece of genetic material on his 15th chromosome. So he only
Mm,
has educationally been placed in the autism spectrum. So to me, I know there's been developments, but it's like he still isn't like codified where he needs to be. And I think we're going to get to a point where there's going to be these chromosomal pieces that people have where they can say this is 16, 15, 14 somehow, because I know when he was younger, it was like, is it Angelman's? Is it, there
Mm,
was a whole host of things that they tried to localize, but they're like, no, that doesn't work, because there wasn't the arms, there wasn't the blue eyes, it's typically blonde. There's all these
mhm.
codifiers that go into any of those specifics. And I just hope that as we advance with levels of technology and AI assisting us, that we can literally get people into places where we can get things that are specifically tailored. Because, the interesting thing about Miles when it comes to sensory is, since he's been young, he loves sports, and I take him to games, and he's fine there. Like I can see him getting full. I know when that cup gets full, but then there will be more
Yeah.
like things like I'm a visual artist, and I went to an art opening a year ago, and there was just ambient music, and there was people eating food and walking around, and he just looked over at me and he was like, I gotta go. And it was like we were out, but we could go to a soccer game and it's like this
Right?
cacophony of sound, right? So it's
Yep.
interesting how it's kind of like COVID. Like there's certain people that got it, there's other people that didn't get it. People got it once, not twice. Other people got boosters and got it 5 times. Like how these things travel and become um, a part of our condition is absolutely a human mystery.
Yes. Yeah. And it just points to how little we still know about ourselves, but
Yes.
that there are opportunities like that where we could, one, be way more evidence-based, looking at chromosomal differences and not coming up with weird names that don't help anybody, that don't help with general understanding, and that are also neutral, right? That with Asperger's, you're thinking, oh, that person must be high functioning again, and you're going, okay, now we've just again ranked people in terms of their abilities, and that's not helpful at all, right? We're really just, I am really just wanting us to get away from any kind of ranking language and just make it a horizontal, right, versus a vertical kind of organization of attributes. And I can totally feel the the not wanting to go into, like, for me it's a conference kind of happy hour networking thing with all those types of sounds,
Yeah.
but I go to the Electric Daisy Carnival almost every year, and
Yeah.
that's a 3-day music festival in Las
Yeah.
Vegas with
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of
Uh-huh.
people, and I am thriving.
Yeah, that's it. It's weird. It's just very weird how it works. Um, so let me ask you this. What is it that gets you up every day to do this work that you do? To not only kind of codify and take care of your environment you're in, but you're also trying to help others deal with the same kind of environmental factors. So taking care of your client, yourself, all of that when the alarm clock goes off, what is that energy for you?
Oh gosh, yeah, I when I first graduated and went into an organization for the first time, there was no, there wasn't any really human resources or just human advocate, I'll call it,
Yeah.
there. And I spent 5 years in this environment just trying to survive and figure out. And I did a pretty good job because, okay, yeah, picking up on the subtleties in my environment, really good at that. Where are the political, weirdnesses and the social networks? But it was so intense and overwhelming. And I spent 5 years, I call it like managing the revenue cycle on the kind of quantitative side of business. And after that, it's like, I've got to switch. There's got to be another way of serving people in a business, and it's not increasing our claims reimbursement. It's focusing on people, and we didn't have this function in my organization, so I had to kind of go out and figure out what this was. But human resources, right, was a space inside of organizations that I thought I could create the employee experience that I would have always wanted and be the confidential resource that I never had, and that would serve the business. Taking care of people takes care of the business. And so I spent then the rest of my internal corporate career in senior human resources leadership, and then most recently in more organizational development, kind of strategy and change management type roles, trying to create systems that were supportive of the human system. We still have this industrial era metaphor that we don't use, but it's absolutely at play inside of organizations, and that's that they are machines and that we are cogs. And organizations are organisms. They share a root for a reason, and they function very similarly. And that's because all of an organization is a bunch of humans together with a shared mental construct of what it is that we're doing around here. And so it's just a collective nervous system that is in a constant state of fear. And no one is having great ideas from that place,
Yeah.
right? Or solving the types of problems we need to solve for a fundamental lack of, I think, the awareness and understanding of like the biology of leadership and the biology of organizations. So that's out of my academic and living systems background that I am leveraging in the inclusion, neuro inclusion work that I'm doing, which is also a humanist perspective. I believe that our existence, simply existing, it is our responsibility to ensure that all species can flourish.
Oh, I totally agree. And I always look at my son and like being in groups where Special Olympics and other kids are at. I think there's a level of them that are enlightened to not be so weighed down by certain things, you know?
Absolutely.
Like
Yes.
there's all of these things that people get totally drowned out on, but there's a simplicity, and I think there's a genius in that. There's a brilliance in that. And it's not something that the world even needs to necessarily recognize, but I think it might be one of the best kept secrets because the outside world looks in and thinks there's something wrong, but really there's nothing wrong. There's probably something wrong with all the rest of us because we get hung up on such superficiality and so many things that are just not beneficial to the nurturing of our human condition. So I'm always so relieved that he thinks the way he does and he does what he does because
Hmm.
it really is the basis of us having a good experience down here.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. In a lot of ways, it absolutely is a more advanced kind of consciousness that the broader world just isn't ready for.
Yeah,
And that scares a lot of people.
for sure. So let me ask you this. If you had a dream tonight, ran into the 18-year-old version of you ready to go out into the world, and you could show that young version of you a 60-second highlight reel of the life you've lived, the choices you've made, do you think that young version of you would believe that your life turned out this way?
I don't think so. I don't think so. At that time, I was still kind of thinking small. Although I have to say that I remember, I still think that person would be like, hell yeah, like thank you. Um, I was in a school bus touring a state school because our high schools, right, all the state schools would send buses and they'd drive you to their school and they'd court you, to go to Portland State or OSU or wherever. And I remember realizing that I was going to stay in town, and U of O is a great school, but I was already feeling as though I was hitting my ceiling. Uh, but I was going to go to the school in my town. And I remember being on that bus and thinking, I am going to stunt my development staying here. I know it. I just know it. And it did mean that I probably am just slightly behind where I could have been if I had left. I don't know that, but I had that feeling at the time. And that was just a really strong intuitive feeling. I very vividly remember being on a bus and going up the highway and thinking that, but having to do it anyway for, cost savings, just economics. And what would have been different if I had been able to, or like just made the choice, to take a bigger risk. But I made up for it by
Yeah,
taking the risk and going to San Francisco. So that accelerated everything.
absolutely. So, of everything that you've done, accomplished, and overcome in your life, what are you the proudest of?
Oof, I'm just proudest of the daily moving forward. That confidence is fear walking, and right, it's a verb, it's an action, and that I wake up every day choosing this kind of alternative path, using language and describing concepts and projecting ideas that aren't mainstream yet, and that is definitely scary. That I'm choosing to do this work on my own because there's really no organization inside which I could fully flourish. And that can sometimes be a scary place to be, on your own.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm proud that I show up every day willing to do the work to figure it out and keep going and serving.
So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone that you know, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Mm. I am I am a loyal, cognitively intense person with a propensity for the ridiculous that I don't share with others right away, creative and analytical and critical thinker. I'm a humanist.
Right on. So, most importantly, if anybody wants to reach out, they want to hire, they want to ask questions, any of the wonderful work that you're doing holistically, where's the best place for them to go?
Sure. Simplest is an email. It's Sira at leadnorthofnormal.com, or that's also my website, leadnorthofnormal.com.
Okay, I will put all these links in the show notes. Sira, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, for what you're doing. I'm appreciative. I know I'm in that world, so it's wonderful. We need more of this happening.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a really pleasure to be here. Thank you for the thoughtful questions.
Yes, thank you.